Welcome to the Healthy Bit podcast with me, Hayley, and my co-host, Henry Herbert. We are going to be talking about how to buy good meat. So you are in for some fantastic information from Henry, because he used to be a butcher, didn't you, Henry? So tell us a little bit about this first.
Yeah. Hey, Hayley, how you doing? Yeah, I guess one of those, I sometimes feel a bit like a Swiss Army knife. I don't know whether it's or jack of all trade, master of none, one or the other. But in a previous life, I ran a butcher shop, and I was working as a chef, and where we have our bakery in Chipping Sodbury, there's a beautiful butcher shop that's been there for, I think, over 150 years. It's got a real history. And I, as a child, used to go in. I actually used to go with my dad to market and buy the cows. So I kind of grew up around this butcher shop. And there was a point maybe about 15 years ago, though it's probably still happening now, where butcher shops were shutting faster than pubs. So, everyone's starting to buy all their meat from the supermarket, and we're kind of losing that kind of high street. And the poor butcher shop was, collateral damage in that moment. And I always kind of vowed that it'd be really sad if Chipping Sodbury lost its butchers. And so I was working as a chef. I'd recently married, having a great time. And then we went traveling. And whilst I was away traveling, my dad sent me a message saying, actually, the butcher shop's up for sale. Sadly, the old butcher had died, and his son didn't want to take it on or wanted to have a career change, and no one wants to buy it. So he said, do you fancy putting him? You said that you always thought it'd be a shame if the butcher shop shut. So, hey, can you come run it for a few months whilst you're looking for a job? And I was like, well, I haven't got a job. I'm traveling, so it could be a bit of fun. And I actually just thought it'd be really easy. So I was like, yeah, fine, I'll run a butcher shop. Why not? I like animals, I like cooking meat, etc. How hard can it be? Turns out really, really hard. But my goodness, what an education. So me and my wife ran this village butchery shop for 3 years, and it's still running now. So we managed to find another butcher to take it on, and it's still going. So actually, I kind of feel like I was a bit of a custodian of it for a brief period, and then I kind of moved back into the bakery. But yeah, I guess it was a real learning curve for me in terms of how to spot good quality meat. And I'm personally quite a big meat eater. I do like it. My wife would probably be vegetarian. She definitely loves her veggies, and so there's always a little bit of conflict. But I think, yeah, running a butcher shop, it gives you that kind of peek behind the curtain of like how the meat industry works, and the good sides, the bad sides, and also how to spot good quality meat. And then also when you've got whole animals, actually, there's the kind of the expensive cuts, the ones that you've all heard of, but then there's the more unusual stuff that actually you can get some, if they're cooked well, you can have some really delicious meals and actually get a bit more bang for your buck. So I guess today is just a bit of it's a request from a message that we had sent in. So this does show that if you want us to talk about something, please do let us know. So this is just a bit of a discussion about all things meat, how to spot it, and how to get the most out of it, because meat is expensive, and rightly so, but we don't want to be wasting our money. So yeah.
So you've mentioned a couple of times there, Henry, that you've learned a lot about how to spot good meat, good quality meat.
Yes.
So for novices and for non-butchers, if you're going into perhaps your local butchery, or if you've got one in your village, something like that,
Yeah.
you walk in, they look really attractive, I always think, in terms of they've got lovely meat counters, you've got like other bits in the shop. How do you know what you're looking for, and how do you know that what you're being served is generally good meat? Unless you get to know the butcher, I assume, because they might tell you the background about where it's come from.
Well, actually, that's probably my first point would be to get to know your butcher, because actually, it's probably a bit like, I always think a butcher's a bit like your hairdresser or your barber, that, it's quite a personal service. So when you go in and you want, whether it's, I want this, I've seen a recipe and I want this specific cut and I'm not quite sure what it is, or, I've got 10 people coming over for dinner, or, whether it's, you're doing Christmas, and actually you're trusting them to kind of make a fairly impactful decision. A bit like when you get a haircut, if you don't trust the person who's got those scissors, you might end up with a dodgy mullet or something, and we've probably all got a story where we've ended up with a dodgy haircut. And so actually getting to know your butcher I think it's critical, because you'll build up that relationship, and it's meat is expensive, and so you are spending decent money. So actually, it's worth putting that effort in. But of course, if you just walk into a butcher shop and you don't know who, you're new in a town, and you think, oh, that looks attractive, let's go in. How do you know that what you're buying is good quality? Because there's always that allure that you can just go to the supermarket and you know that it's probably going to be a bit cheaper, and you're not going to have the friction of having to talk to someone, or quite often it's quite intimidating, isn't it, when they're there with their steel and their knife and they're kind of uh, doing that kind of
Yeah.
sharpening sound, and it can feel a little intimidating. And so the supermarket feels kind of safe, and it feels kind of easy, and you just pop it in your basket. But actually, the advantage of using a good butcher's is that or a good farm shop, is that you can actually ask some questions and to kind of validate that what you're getting is good quality. So a few things that I would always ask is, when it comes to butchery, particularly when it comes to beef, and often beef is more expensive, so you want to make sure that if you're buying a steak, you're getting a good steak, etc. So there's something called carcass butchery. Now, when you buy a cow at the abattoir, it'll be chopped into 4 pieces. So it'll be the forequarter and the hindquarter, and this is just because carrying a whole cow, unless you're the world's strongest man, is very difficult. But like a quarter of a cow weighs about 70 to 80 kilos, and that's just about manageable for someone to carry on their shoulder, from the fridge to the block. So the cow comes in 4 quarters. Now, in a good butcher, they'll be buying in a whole carcass, so they'll get 4 quarters, 2 fronts and 2 backs, and they'll be hanging it on the bone. So they'll buy it probably maybe 10 to 2 weeks old. So it's already aged a little bit at the abattoir, and then it'll come to them, and then they'll age it for probably another week, and then on to 2 to 3 weeks more for your kind of your prime cuts, so your ribeyes, your sirloins, your steaks, where you want a bit more kind of a mature flavor. Whereas your kind of stewing steaks, or the stuff that you'd be using for mince, actually you don't need to age it more than kind of 3 weeks is fine. So if you're doing carcass butchery, that requires a skilled butcher, because to take a whole cow that's probably costs, well, actually these days a whole carcass is probably about £2,000. So you're buying an incredibly expensive thing, and now you're going to chop it up and sell it. You need to make sure that you're doing it properly. So if you're a supermarket, it's much easier to buy it in what they call in primals. So at the abattoir, they will quickly chop it down, and then they will vac pack them in the large joints. So you'll have your sirloins, your top sides, your silver sides, your chuck, your different cuts, and they'll vac pack these down, and then you can buy them, and it's known as boxed meat. So as a butcher, if you're very busy and you don't have enough skilled resource, it's very tempting to buy boxed meat in, because you just literally, you get out the box, you'll have a sirloin off the bone, you take it out the plastic, you just pat off the kind of the liquid that's been swimming around in the fat pack bag, and then you can slice it up, put it out on the counter, and you walk in as Mrs. Miggins to come buy your or Joe Blogs to buy your steak, and you're trusting that they've bought, or that they've done this properly, and actually they're kind of doing what the supermarkets are doing. And it's just it's easier. So as a telltale sign, if you can see large bits of meat on the bone, that's normally a good sign that they're doing carcass butchery, and you'll see what large bits of meat look like. It's enormous. 75 kilos of meat. It's like the size of a human. If that's hanging somewhere or on the block, then you know that they're buying whole carcass cows, and they're doing it properly. If their prep is all out the back, and actually it's just a lovely display at the front, the question I always ask is, have you got any bones? I want to make some stock, or I want to give my dog a bone. Because if you're doing carcass butchery, you end up with a lot of bones. And as a butcher, you have to pay to get the bones taken away. So that's just a really low friction question. You can just go in and say, hey, I want to make some stock for my bone broth because I want some good collagen, because I want to have lovely skin and nice hair, as we've talked about. And if they go, oh, sorry, we haven't got any bones, then that for me, that's a red flag of why haven't you got any bones? Surely there's a bone butchers. If you haven't got any bones, that means that you're probably buying in boxed meat, which means if your prices are significantly higher than the supermarket, what value am I getting? Because I might as well just go to the. Now, when it comes to, you might be asking, well, what's the big deal? If you're just buying a sirloin steak, why does it matter whether it's come off the carcass and the butcher's prepped it for you, or whether they've bought it in boxed if it's more convenient? Why does that make a difference? The main thing is that when you have large pieces of meat, if you were to slaughter a cow and then eat it straight away, it'd be incredibly fresh, and it would be tough and chewy, and would have an insipid flavor. And beef's one of these great proteins that it actually improves with aging. Now you can take it too far, and I believe there's a restaurant in Sweden that ages for like 200 days, and they like wrap the whole thing in tallow and whatever. And apparently, you only need a very tiny slither because it's so intense. Most people don't need that. Like that's too far. But actually, kind of like you'll see it on labels. 28-day aged, or 30-day aged, or 45-day aged, and that aging process is uh, um, the proteins are kind of breaking down and it's becoming more tender. Now you can do that dry aging or wet aging, and dry aging is essentially where you're doing it on the bone and you're allowing moisture to come out of the beef. I would think of that as like, say you've made a gravy and it's tasting a little insipid. One of the ways that you can make it more flavorsome is you can reduce it. So you boil it away and you remove some of that liquid and you're intensifying the flavor, and then you end up with a more kind of more aromatic, more intense flavor. It's the same with the beef. If you allow it to dry age, moisture's coming out, and so you end up with a more tender piece of meat, but also something that has more flavor. Now, this is the crux of it: is that moisture is money. So if you're a big supermarket or a big, producer of meat, and every gram that you're losing off the weight is profit off the bottom line, well, you're not that keen on that. You want to keep as much liquid inside the meat as possible. So they came up with this genius thing, which is wet aging, where they vac pack it. So you take the meat off the bone, you then vac pack it. It's very hard to vac pack with the bones in because the bones are pointy and they blow the bag, and then you end up with airflow, and then that can spoil it. So they take it off the bone as quickly as possible. So within, probably 4 or 5 days, it's butchered down, done at the abattoir. They'll then vat pack it, and now it can age in the bag. Now, the great thing with that is that it's maturing. So in theory, after 30 days, it'll be more tender, but it hasn't lost much weight. And
I see.
so when you sell it, you're getting, you're buying a 200-gram steak, a dry aged one, and a wet aged one. They'll weigh the same, but when you come to cooking it, all that moisture has got to come out, and you don't get that kind of intense flavor.
And
Whether
that's
there's
why
health
the meat
benefits,
shrinks, I assume, is it?
shrink, yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's probably most visible with bacon. Bacon's where you get, because you can, if you buy cheap bacon and you put it in the pan, the first thing that happens is a load of white water comes out. Uh, and then it has to like dry out, and then it starts to caramelize. Whereas when you buy good quality bacon, no water comes out and it just caramelizes straight away. And that's because it's been the way that they've cured it. One is dry, one is wet. And water is money. If you can if you can keep more water in your meat, you're going to make more money. And unfortunately, our food industry is entirely, or not entirely, is the majority of it is profit driven.
So I
So the
assume
more
then,
money you,
Henry, do they sometimes inject these meats with extra water to basically plump them up more?
well, I,
Is
I
this a
think I
thing?
might have mentioned at Christmas the con of the self-basting turkey. That's probably the most blatant one I've seen, where they are advertising that they've added water. But I guess, yeah, with like bacon, yeah, it's, if you make it at home and you just rub it with salt and a bit of sugar and a bit of black pepper, maybe a few bit of thyme, bit of rosemary, etc. Lots of liquid will come out of your bacon, and after 7 days, you then wash it off, leave it to dry, air dry for a few days in your fridge. Then you come to slice it and cook it. You're going to get delicious bacon. But of course, if you submerged it into a brine, it cures much quicker, and also water goes in. But actually, on really cheap bacon, they slice it and cure it in slices. So they're not even curing it as a whole thing, which might take a week or so. They're curing it individually in slices, which takes probably, you know, 20 minutes. So they're literally just sliding it through, and it's incredibly quick because obviously time is money. And also, the more surface area, the more it can absorb that liquid. So, it's a cured product, but actually when you cook it, it shrinks, and you end up, it's crap. Anyway, and I think it's a total false economy. So you're getting a poor quality product and also a load of water that you've paid for. Even if the price per kilo looks cheaper, you got to be careful.
And it's
So with
probably had
beef,
other things added in as well, has it, to preserve the
yeah,
shelf life within the plastic that it's in? So there's other
yeah,
disadvantages to doing it that way. And like
totally.
you say, you could just ask your so you going to the butcher, you could, it's 2 simple questions. Yeah, have you got any bones? And also
Yes.
maybe how old is or how many days has it matured? And that would give you a bit of an idea as to
Yeah. And
maybe
you
how
could just
tasty
ask,
the meat's gonna be.
the great thing with beef, if they're buying if they're buying it on the carcass, all carcasses will have a tag saying which farm it comes from. So you can ask that question. It's quite easy. Like, so I guess it's probably a good thing of legislation is that I think it was maybe I don't know exactly, but after the whole horse meat scandal, there was a bit more kind of like rigorous traceability to make sure that people weren't being scammed, removing corruption from the industry. So it's fairly easy as a customer just to ask. And actually a lot of butchers will, if they're buying good quality meat, they'll write it up on the board being like, this cow this week is from, X farm 25 miles away, because it's like when I was a butcher, when I was buying, animals from the abattoir, I wouldn't always know the farm personally, but like it's not difficult to find that information out and then just write it up, because I was interested and I was passionate about the meat and I was buying good quality animals. And so I therefore wanted to share it with my customer, and I kind of, and so why would I lie about that? It's kind of, but that's, and not all butchers will do that. I guess, I was probably, kind of young and enthusiastic, and I guess maybe some are a bit more kind of old school and stuck in their ways. But generally speaking, if you chat to someone who's passionate about it, you can normally tell whether
They're
they're
going to tell you.
the crap. Like if they're BSing you, you normally know. And so for me, they would be some telltale signs. Like if
Fine.
if there's no bones and they're not hanging it and they don't know where it's come from, chances are it's coming from Argentina or Ireland, or it's imported because it's cheaper, and therefore you might as well just buy it from the supermarket, because the quality is not going to be a huge difference. The one thing I would say, and I don't want to completely beef about or badmouth supermarket meat, particularly when it comes to beef and lamb. If it's British, okay, so there's particularly on the internet and fancy restaurants, you'll hear a lot about grass fed. Now, grass fed is, for me, ultimately the best. Like a cow is a ruminant, and it's it was built to to eat grass, and that's its natural diet. And so when you see all the kind of the horror stories of big American farms where they're standing on concrete and they're just eating corn and soybeans and stuff, and it's not their natural diet. They're not moving around. They're not on grass. They're on concrete. That is a very different product. We don't have that in the UK. Pretty much all beef from the UK will be grass fed. They may finish it for the last kind of 10 to 20% of its life on grain just to bulk it up, because they want to get a bit more extra weight so they get a bit more money. But actually, for 80% of its life, it's been on grass. And it's rained for 41 days straight in the UK. We've got great grass. So actually, if you're in the supermarket and you're buying beef and it's British, even if it's not the best, it's still going to be better than what you're buying from like America. So like, though, I think there's a lot of like freak out that like, around supermarket meat, that it's all awful. Actually, it's not. For things like chicken and pork, a lot of kind of budget chicken and pork probably is not great, because it will be barn reared, or it won't have had access to outdoor space. It's probably had lots of antibiotics and all sorts of stuff. Whereas sheep, again, you don't really tend to get factory farm sheep. They tend to they're pretty good at just eating scrubland up in the hills and stuff, and that's where most of them live. So even cheap lamb from from the supermarket, though actually no lambs are cheap, it's all really expensive, but it'll be pretty good. But it's more around kind of like how it's been finished. When you're getting it from the abattoir, some of that might go to McDonald's, some of that might go to the supermarket, some of it might go to the butchers. But then if the butcher is treating it differently, they're dry aging it, they're chopping it on site, you're going to get a better quality finish. And then also, of course, the much more premium cows and stuff tend to go to the restaurants or the high end butchers, because that's where they attract the most value.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's with the kind of beefy products. How about like bacon, sausages, in terms of in the supermarkets? And I know you can buy them in supermarkets, obviously, like say, probably quite cheap meat, and they're usually full of nitrates. And I know some supermarkets actually do have nitrate-free bacon.
Yes.
How, and I think if you look at, sometimes when you buy it from the butchers, if you turn it over, occasionally it does say it's still got nitrates in. Is that
Yes.
in every case, or what
Well,
role does it
so
have?
I guess sausages are, I mean, there's a saying, I'm going to get it wrong, but it's like, don't look what's in the sausage, because obviously, there's an assumption that it's all the crap. So I guess the thing with sausages is that in the UK we have minimum meat content. there's a limit of how little meat you can put in, which, you can look at that as kind of reassuring or not reassuring. It's quite low. I think it's like 66% or something. So a sausage doesn't actually have to be, it's not 100% meat. It can be quite a lot of other stuff, and that other stuff tends to be cheap filler, so bread, so rusks, which is what they're called. It's a dried breadcrumb. It doesn't have yeast in it, so it doesn't ferment, but it kind of adds cheap filler. Whereas in the continent, in France, it's illegal. They're not allowed to put cereals into sausages, and that's why their sausages tend to be meatier and a bit coarser. So they tend to, you don't have like hot dogs. You have more kind of like, sausage with cassoulet, or like, they tend to be kind of like slow cooked, because they're a bit kind of coarser and chunkier, and they tend to be a little drier because actually the breadcrumbs act as little sponges, and it kind of absorbs the moisture. So you end up with that kind of squeaky kind of banger. But of course, a cheap budget sausage will put the absolute minimum meat they can get away with, because they're trying to keep it as cheap as possible. So when you're eating a cheap sausage, it can quite often feel quite bready, because it's actually probably 40% bread. So you're almost getting your roll inside the sausage. Whereas when we used to make our sausages, I was quite snooty about it, and started off by putting no rusk in, but actually the British customers liked that little squeaky, kind of slightly juicy sausage. So we ended up doing about 10%. So we were 90% meat, 10% rusk. And for me, that felt like a good level. Like, it was still premium. It had a lot of meat in it, but it was a little bit juicy, but not, it wasn't too bready. And so depending on the butchers, will depend on how they're doing. I guess the
Would a
temptation of
butcher,
adding
sorry to interrupt you there,
adding
Henry.
preservatives to sausages will be, if you're a butcher and you've only got 2 staff, say, you might only make sausages once a week. So you need those sausages to last and look presentable for, 5-6 days, and then not go off in people's fridges. So the temptation is that you just put just a little bit of preservative, and it just keeps them shiny, stops them from, and I think that is always going to be the case. And most butcher shops that I've been to, you ask them, pretty much I would say all of them put some form of nitrate in, or, some kind of preserving, but just to stop them looking sweaty. And same with bacon. It's like, British consumer is so dialed into pink bacon when they cook it, that if you don't have nitrates and it goes grey straight away, they think it's gone off. And so it's almost
Yeah.
like an education piece. Like the nitrate, particularly in dry cured bacon, all it's doing is meaning that when you cook it, it stays pink. And actually, it's not doing a huge amount else. Maybe in the kind of the cheaper wet cured stuff, maybe there's another benefit that I'm not an expert on. But particularly when it comes to dry aging, dry curing, and then if you're then smoking it as well, the nitrate really is not doing a huge amount apart from it stays pink. And having worked run a butcher shop for 3 years, if your public won't buy it because they think it's gone off, it's a terrible business model. So you're in this kind of rock and a hard place of like, well, I might think that nitrates are irrelevant, but if my consumer won't buy them, well, now I've lost my business. So like it's
Depends how you
hard.
promo it, I guess, isn't it? With the nitrate, if you say like, it's a bit like apricots. They shouldn't really be that orangey color. They should be brown.
Yeah.
You buy dried ones. So actually, everyone thinks when they buy a packet of dried apricots, they should be still that orangey color.
Yes.
So in terms of the nitrate, is it an organic product that they use? What do they actually like? What is the nitrate bit?
Well, it's the stuff that we used to use. It came in the bucket. It was called saltpeter, and it was quite hard to get hold of, because I think it's it can be used to make explosives in the wrong hands. I never made explosive. I don't know. So much about a bag of fertilizer and some nitrates. I believe I could do some googling, or ask ChatGPT. But I think it comes from like cave walls or something. I don't know. I think it's like it's a mineral. Like it's essentially it's a salt. It's a natural salt, but it's strong, and like, so you only need tiny amounts. So if we were curing bacon, we would put a kilo of salt on, it'd probably have less than 1% nitrate to that kilo of salt. So it's a very small amount. And but I know that, I remember you mentioned when we did the ultra processed food episode that you said that nitrates was a bit of a kind of red flag for you. And I've since been looking, and obviously it's in quite a lot of cured meats, isn't it?
It's in a lot,
and probably the amount I was putting in, I don't know. I haven't made bacon for a few years. And probably if I made it at home, I wouldn't bother, because it's quite hard to buy it. use um
It's the
I would just use
sulfates as well, sulfates. It's that too, isn't it? It's those elements. So, yeah, so in
yes,
terms of the bacon side, 'cause, the World Health Organization, since I think 2015, have said that bacon and sausages are a carcinogen, a grade one
yes.
or the highest form. But I guess, does that depend, do you think, on how that's actually being produced and how it's been stored and what's happened to that particular meat
Yeah.
might have an impact on its.
I think like so we used to make our own ham. We used to we used I was a big believer in that we should make everything from scratch. And we at the kind of the sundries wholesalers that we would buy spices from and pepper and salt and stuff, you're getting your dry stores, they would have these kind of premixes that would then, so you could buy like Lincolnshire sausage flavor, you could buy salami mix, you could buy these kind of premix things that were just convenient. And it just said, add 100 grams to a kilo of whatever, and it'll make a certain product. And obviously lots of butchers aren't chefs, then they wouldn't trust themselves to like get that korma chicken flavor, whatever they're doing, sticky sauce on. They just pre-buy it in. And so a lot of those things are probably red flags. So if you go into a butcher shop and you see lots of chicken in sloppy sauces, they're almost certainly not homemade, and they're probably absolutely riddled with all sorts of sulfates and nitrates and preservatives, because they're kind of designed to keep the meat looking nice in the counter. But then you just buy a chicken and then make the sauce yourself. Like it's not that difficult. I think that's, if there's anything that I want to preach on this podcast, is that it's better just to do it yourself, because then you're in control. So like, go to the butcher and buy the good chicken. And also the good chicken that they're using is going to be in that sloppy sauce. It's just that the coating on the sloppy sauce is probably not great. And,
Yeah.
and
So are
if it
there
is a
things
home,
to watch for is there things to watch for the chicken as well? So like,
well, chicken, I
a
mean,
bit like
chicken's a
your,
tricky.
is it a tricky one?
So, chicken's a tricky one, because I pretty much would only buy organic chicken, but actually it's really hard to buy organic chicken in a butcher shop, because organic chicken is super expensive. I mean, like, probably, a 2 kilo organic chicken in a butcher shop is probably going to cost you, pushing 30 quid. Whereas, you can get a barn chicken from Aldi probably for 8 quid. That's a lot of money. And so I'd just rather have beef, because like, I know that with beef, you're a bit safe. Like, you know that it's grass fed, that it's not, been pumped full of hormones and this kind of stuff. Whereas chicken feels like, if you get the wrong one, it's going to be quite cheap. So I guess you just have to, ask them, where are they from? Like, are they, is it free range? Because a lot of butchers I see, they'll sell amazing beef. The lamb will be great. The pork, they might be a heritage pork, might be like an old spot or a British lop, or, whatever. They might have a kind of heritage breed to it, nice bit of fat on it. And then the chicken, quite often, is just barn reared, because and it's because people see chicken as cheap. And, it's like they want to buy a pack of chicken breasts probably for a tenner. And they want to get five big chicken breasts for a tenner, and not really think too much about it. And maybe they feel, I'm buying it from my local butchers, therefore it's going to be high quality. And actually, it's probably the same quality that you'd get from the supermarket.
So actually
I
the
think the other thing
chicken
I
is
said
the
was
one thing that, yes, you be careful with the chicken, but the other meats,
chickens.
especially the beef,
Yeah,
is
and it's
probably
it's so
more
cheap
likely.
to produce chicken. Like, well, it's not so cheap to produce chicken, but you can produce chicken incredibly quickly. And we quite often go on holiday in France, and they'll have their poulet fumé, which is, I think it's like farmyard chicken. And essentially it's like these chickens are like, they're quite leggy, they've got small breasts, they've got big legs, and they're quite often sold with the head on. And this chicken will have been racing around the farmyard, and they've got real flavor. But us Brits were just like, we don't know what to do with them, because we're like, it's tough, like, they're chewy, the breasts were sinewy, like. But of course the French cook them, they do coq au vin, they cook it for a long, slow time, because they know it's, this animal's done a lot of moving, and it's not just this kind of super tender thing that, that the kids are going to just, slip down easily. And that's where the British consumer is used to a kind of a fat chicken that's not done much movement and is incredibly tender. And to produce that chicken, you kind of, they're not caged, but they're just, they're in barns, they're warm, they're fed incredibly quickly until they put on loads of weight and then they're killed pretty quickly. It's the cycle of a chicken is very, very short. I think I'll get the days wrong, but it's around about 40 days from like start to finish.
Oh yeah,
Like if you,
it's quick.
I've got a nice butcher shop and they sell 100-day chicken, and it's more like the French one. You're like, it's only 100 days. I mean, that's like a third of a year. Whereas you think like a cow minimum, it's like 18 months, 2 years.
So
Minimum.
is that something to ask the butcher then? Like how many days were the chickens alive
Yeah,
before?
it'd be good. That'd be a good one. That might put them on the spot slightly because my experience is most, unless they are really passionate about chicken, most of them, they'll be like a lot of butcher's chicken comes from a company called Banham, and they're based in Norfolk, and I think pretty sure they're based in Norfolk, and they're just like they're the chicken you see in. Like, I spot the boxes and all the butchers. You go in there, you're like, oh, Banham chicken, Banham chicken, Banham chicken, and they're just they're a good they're a fine chicken. The butchers are probably getting the better quality than the supermarkets. So they're probably paying a bit of a premium for the slightly nicer birds, but they've all come out. They've all come out the same sausage machine. Yeah. So chicken's a tricky one.
So
That's
do
why.
you then, yeah, so I'm interested in Henry. So if you go, what do you tend to order from the butchers? Do you avoid buying chicken then? Do you not have as many
Yeah,
chicken dishes
I
and you
wouldn't.
focus on one?
Yeah, I wouldn't buy chicken often from the butcher. I mean, I would buy occasionally, but not too often. And for me, yeah, I'd go beef. I actually think that like minced beef is great because the nice thing with minced beef is that it tends to be forequarter stuff, which is just slightly more hardworking muscles, but it's a bit cheaper. But it's got more flavor. The temptation is to go for to go for the really lean stuff, but actually I always ask for a bit of extra fat because one is it's a bit more flavor. Like when you cook it, it kind of self lubricates and it's a bit juicier. But also I'm not afraid of fat. I like a bit of fat in my life. So whether 10 to 20%, and particularly if you're making burgers, a high percentage of fat makes them really super juicy. And but also you're getting all that kind of sinew and all that kind of connective tissue, which is all packed full of collagen. So it's all good stuff. And then because it's minced, it's all broken down, so it doesn't get stuck in your teeth or chewing it because it's gone through the mincer. So actually, it's a really good way to get a kind of mixture of different proteins, different muscle meats, bits of sinew, bit of connective tissue, bit of fat, all mixed in together. Um, and then it's very easy to eat. So you can make meatballs, you can make burgers, you can make bolognese, all that kind of stuff. So for me, that's like probably the one I use the most. It's super universal. I mean, obviously Sunday roast, it's nice to have a piece of top side or a bit of sirloin, but it does cost more money. I used to say things like, kind of like brisket or ox cheek or oxtail were kind of like the cheaper cuts, but sadly in recent years they've become quite fashionable. So actually even they're quite expensive. It's hard to find a cheap a, uh, a cheap cut. Probably liver is probably still pretty cheap. Actually, ox heart, if you can tolerate it, and you probably have to prep it yourself, but you can buy a whole ox heart for about a fiver, and in terms of weight, they're probably 2 kilos. Now you'll get quite a lot of trim, so you need to and it's quite gruesome because you've got all of the kind of the valves and the vents and the
All the
yeah,
aortas.
all those things. So you trim all that off, but then you slice it thin into little steaks, and you'll probably get, let's say, 2 weeks worth of a steak a day kind of thing, and you just got to cook it quickly and quite pink. Rest it. It's quite useful if you're frying it in a pan to deglaze it with a little bit of sherry vinegar or some red wine vinegar and some butter. And the sherry vinegar it's quite a strong flavor, and so that acidity just helps kind of like mellow the kind of ironiness of it, because obviously it's at the heart's done a lot of pumping. It's got quite a kind of irony, bloody taste, but actually super delicious, and that is very cheap. But I'm not saying that everyone's going to run out and start buying. There's not going to be a run on ox heart, but for me, of all of the kind of cheaper cuts, the offals, that one's the easiest. I don't mind liver, but I've eaten spleen a few times, but it's not a family favorite. But yeah, ox heart is quite an easy one. But
Yeah.
my
And I
kids would
remember,
probably prefer it when I bought fillet steak home.
yeah, that's it. And I remember on our Christmas podcast, you gave a great top tip to actually get the turkey legs instead of just the
Yeah, yeah,
turkey crown.
yeah, yeah.
That was such a good top tip. So if people want to keep their prices down because they want to they want to go to the butchers, they want to try and get the better quality meat. And, they don't want to be fooled by what could be going on at the butchers if, like you say, if the meat
Yes.
generally comes from the same place, unless it is a sort of grass-fed kind of beef. What kind of, is there like a kind of shopping list that you'd go, right, you could go in and ask for this, and this would actually be a good balance between price and good quality meat? What would the average
Yeah.
family go and order?
Well, so if you're into if you're looking for steaks, obviously your ribeyes, your sirloins, your fillets, they're going to be the most expensive things you can buy because that's the prime cuts, and that's where the butcher makes all their money on. So there are cheaper steaks you can buy. So obviously rumps tends to be a bit cheaper, a little bit chewier. But things like skirt steak is a great one, or bavette is the French name. It comes from this part here, and it's kind of got this kind of long kind of like strands of protein with the muscle. But as long as you cut against the grain, it's incredibly tender, and that'll be possibly a third of the price of fillet. So it'll be more priced like mince beef. So kind of £10 a kilo or so. So that is a great for if you're doing steak sandwiches or steak and chips, that is a really good one. If you can get it, hanger steak, or onglet is the French name. The British name is known as gut steak, which is not very appealing. So we'll go with the American or the French. And that is actually an internal. It hangs off the diaphragm of the cow. So actually, it's classified as offal. And so when they pull out all of, sorry, we're getting really gruesome here. When they
No,
when
I don't
they
mind
when
it.
they when they pull out all of the kind of the liver and the kidneys and all that, not the kidneys, all the kind of offally bits, the intestines, it's a piece of muscle that kind of hangs off the diaphragm that holds it all together. And so it's classified as offal. And there's only one per cow, and it is absolutely delicious, So I quite often order that from the butcher, but they tend to, that'd be the kind of thing that if they're not selling it, they could get it in for you. And so they would get it from the abattoir. It doesn't get hung because it's a steak that's kind of, it's not on a bone, so you can't really hang it. But actually, it's got great flavor and it tends to be pretty cheap. They might make you prep it yourself, so you might have to get your knives out and trim off all the fat and sinew and stuff. But that is one of my favorite steaks. It's got so much flavor. I think the French used to call it the butcher steak because it was like the one that they didn't sell. They kept it for themselves because it was like the little secret. So that's a really good one. But again, any kind of, I think mince is great. Actually, long live mince, and when you see supermarket mince and it's in the packet, it's all perfect. You open it up and it goes brown really quickly. That's because they pump the trays with oxygen, so they don't. No, they pump them with CO2, so they don't oxidize. Sorry, other way around. And so they look fresher for longer, but actually that mince isn't fresh. Quite often in a butcher shop, they'll quite often mince it for you because there's no point mincing kilos and kilos and kilos of mince because it will, it doesn't last very long. So actually you can quite often see them, take that piece of meat, put it into the mincer and straight into the bag. And so, you're getting good quality fresh meat. There's no, they're not putting all load of crap in it. It hasn't been hanging around for weeks and weeks in a fridge or in a freezer, etc. So yeah, so I think mince is great. I buy it in bulk and then just portion it into, half kilo, like 200-gram bags. And then we just, it's an easy one to whip it out and then you can cook a quick meal with it. So I think,
Yeah.
I think mince is it's a good shout.
Yeah, no, that's good because I think we're made to think that mince isn't such a healthy option
Yeah,
for
yeah.
meat, aren't we? But
Mm.
it's interesting how these things kind of
Yeah, yeah.
flip back around. And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's great. I think, that's amazing information. I think my stomach has rumbled basically throughout that
Yeah,
whole
yeah. I haven't had dinner either.
episode.
I think this is a subject I could go for hours. Like, and
Yeah, I think we can do
I
more.
can see that we've talked quite a long time. But yeah, it's a passionate one of mine. I think the things that I always live by is if you can support your local butcher, do, because once they're gone, they're gone. It's such a probably unattractive business model that not many are opening. Though there has been a few opening in kind of bougie parts of town. But yeah, if you've got a butcher, do support them. And also, like, maybe meat for a treat, like if meat is expensive and but you want to, like, try and eat good quality, but just eat it a little bit less, I mean, that would be my advice, rather than kind of, just buying kind of cheap chicken or cheap pork, actually, kind of hold out and have something decent because it does taste nicer. And I think you'll enjoy it more.
Well, I think if you think it goes back to the old fashioned days, that's what they used to do, didn't they? They used to have
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
quality beef on a Sunday. And they used to kind of try and save the best meat for that particular day, or
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
a couple of times in the
yeah.
week if
And
they
make
were
it
quite
last.
well off. But
Totally,
yeah, make it last, don't they? And
totally.
yeah, and I think if you do it like that, it's a healthier way to get your protein, and to get your iron levels as well. Because if you think
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it, that's how you can get your iron.
And
So
and
yeah,
failing that, you just need to befriend a local butcher or someone who can butcher up a cow, i.e. me, and then go in and buy a whole cow and then get yourself a chest freezer. That's probably the cheapest way to do it. But
yeah.
yeah, they're about 2,000 quid and yeah, about 400 kilos. So you get a lot of meat. It'll last you a year.
Yeah, I think we should get people's feedback, see how they got on with their local
Yeah, yeah,
butcher's
yeah,
visit, and
yeah,
what meat they
definitely.
bought and what things. So maybe on another episode, Henry, you can talk about some nice recipes to do with some of those more
Definitely,
unusual cuts
definitely.
that some of us, like myself, have never heard of.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, no, I'd happily do that. Yeah, let's do a part two. Oh, well, great to chat to you as always, Hayley.